Hi, everyone. So, I wanted to start with a quote from Michael Bhaskar. Has anybody read The Content Machine? You all should. It's very good. The quote's really quick. Publishing is weird. Publishing is really weird, and it's getting weirder. And I wanted to start by talking a little bit about my own weirdness. I am weird. I come from a background in English literature. My dissertation, I'm not going to tell you what my dissertation is about, was okay, fine, I will. 19th century linguistics and the influence of linguistics on dialect literature in regional parts of the U.S., mostly the Southeast. It has very little to do with what I'm doing right now. I am the Gray Family Chair for Innovative Library Services with a special focus on digital publishing. So at Oregon State, I am charged with, and my university librarian talked about the charge that I had in front of a very large crowd of people for the first time, and this is when I first realized that I was charged with, mandated with, creating a publishing platform across the press and the libraries and campus in general. And I had a moment of heart and throat panic in the audience when she pointed me out. I was like, I'm going to try. But I came into publishing the way a lot of people come into publishing, accidentally. And I think there's something profound about the accidents that bring us here. For me, it was a chance to work at the University of Michigan, where I did my PhD. It was a chance to work at Michigan Publishing, which is part of the library, but also the organization that oversees the press as well. So it's a fairly new model of press and library integration. And preparing for that job talk was the accident in some ways. I had to do a lot of the stuff that I'd done in graduate school, problem solving. And once I started actually looking at the context of publishing, like Sarah mentioned, that's when I began to see the publishing, the activity, the core space of publishing as a field, not as just a blasé set of activities or skills that we can rattle off, but as something that deserves full exploration as a field. So this is when I sort of developed that sense of purpose. There really was a problem to be solved here. And of course, there is certainly a problem to be solved now that we have entered the world of disintermediation, a space where networks are profoundly robust, a space where platforms for pushing content out to those networks are profoundly accessible. We are in a place where publishing is a field that really needs a lot of creative thinking. But before we get into the weeds of disintermediation, it's probably good to start with just a little bit of history about publisher training in the 20th century mostly. So, and this is something that the article Sarah shared with you does really, really well, but I wanted to treat this just quickly so that we have a little bit of grounding. So, very quickly, for the most part, publisher training happened as we all know, and probably as a lot of us experienced, and most of us are publishers in the room, it looks like, so this is a pretty easy story to narrate in-house, right? It was an apprenticeship of sorts. There were in the mid-20th century some summer publishing courses that cropped up. The Radcliffe course is probably the most well-known. And then slowly throughout the 20th century, in the 70s or so, this is when more programmatic curriculum, established especially by the Association of American Publishers, began to appear on the scene. These were mostly oriented around book-to-market processes, right? Editing, marketing, finance, management, less around product design, which was seen as its own separate field. And now with the 21st century, we kind of still see this legacy of book-to-market curriculum in a lot of present-day course offerings. And I think just canvassing some of the offerings out there, there's a move into digital production. There's a move into digital design. It's still very much focused around that thing to market process, though, I think. And that's something that I want to poke at. So these courses are all answering the question, what do publishers do? They're all focused on content. And I think we could all fairly easily come up with a curriculum, right? I was asked to be on a sort of more impromptu panel the other day, and it was a sort of broad thinking across publishing in terms of some of the major challenges. I was like, major challenges, I can do that. And I know the major challenges really, really well. And I think we all know the major curricular points really, really well. Right? We'd all probably come up with a list something like this. Acquisitions and commissioning, review and editing, copyright and rights clearance, production and design, marketing, promotion, distribution. Maybe something a little bit more around logistics and business models. But for the most part, this would be the list that we'd come up with. But I want to notice how all of these categories are about content. They're about the what. And we end up with a really narrow channel view of something that's just about nouns. And part of me, maybe this is me, this is the English literature me, but nouns feel really static to me. And a curriculum that only focuses on that noun, that product, feels stale, to be frank, feels a little bit static. Answering the what of publishing doesn't answer the why of publishing. It doesn't answer that question, what are publishers for, right? We have to confront the fact that we do live in a world where disintermediation is not just a kind of scary specter word. It's a real thing, and it's a real process. This is a hugely important question precisely because of disintermediation. And these are all the things that Rick Joyce talked about in his keynote yesterday. So we have this world that's dominated by networks and platforms that make accessing those networks with content really easy. In the controversial but sometimes apt phrase from Clay Shirky, publishing is now a button, right? There's a sense that we can push content out there really, really easily. But I think Clay is also wrong, and he actually does too. This is mean to do when someone's not in a room, but I'm going to use his own words to contradict him. Because he also says that there's no such thing as information overload, there's only filter failure, right? The problem of being inundated with content is not a problem of the internet, it's a problem of better ways of filtering out that content. And the question I want to ask is, who's going to make the next generation content filters? I mean, we have a lot of these appearing on the scene. I think they tend to come and go. The real question I want to ask is, what grounds will the decisions surrounding filtration be made? And that's something that publishers are all about, right? Determining on what grounds good selection is made. And these are some of the most important questions we can ask. And they have to do with the most important contribution publishers can make to a new disintermediated ecosystem. I love this quote from Rick Joyce, which has everything to do with the context of publishing. And that's where I want to head to next. So on Tuesday, during his keynote, he said something, I don't know if a lot of people caught it, but it was such a nice condensation of what publishers do. He said, I'm a publisher, I don't write the books, I point at them. And it felt like a kind of flippant and maybe trivializing thing to say, but I actually think it's a pretty profound thing that we do as publishers. So what does it mean to point at books? I mean, part of this is another process that Michael Bhaskar, who I mentioned, talks about as amplification, right? The process not just of marketing, not just of putting materials in front of readers, but of making those materials effective, right? Making those materials something worth accessing, something worth attention. And we probably all know the shift toward an attention economy is where publishers are heading to next. And I think that's something that I would love to think about on the level of a curriculum. What does it mean to teach attention? What does it mean to teach toward an attention economy? So the sort of standard joke in digital publishing is the best way to make money in digital publishing is to host a conference, right? But I actually take this seriously. I actually want to kind of, okay, here comes English Lit me again. I actually want to unpack this phrase a little bit. Like, it's actually true, right? This is where a lot of money does get raised, is in membership fees, webinars, hosting social events around conversation and discussion. But I think there's a reason for that. So here's a quote from Craig Maud, who's a publisher and a writer. He says, "Publisher roles have shifted. Their value lies as community builders, curators, and editorial advisors, not just deep-pocketed gatekeepers and financiers to the mythical land of printed matter, national distribution systems, and physical shop fronts." And those three key areas that he identifies, community building, curation, and editorial advisement, that's what happens at conferences, right? We have those conversations that create community. I mean, the fact that we're here in a room filled with publishers, librarians, students, consultants, vendors, I mean, this is a weird freaking ecosystem that brings a lot of kooky people together in ways that I think are really actually pretty powerful. That's a job that we have, and identifying it as a role for publishing is actually really important. I think we sort of see ourselves as autonomous constituents that, yeah, every once in a while we come together. But there actually is a community here that's worth acknowledging and worth talking about, again, at the curricular level. How do we actually train a community that doesn't exist autonomously in its own siloed space, right? We have iSchools and MLIS degrees. We have these publishing summer courses and some dedicated dedicated publishing degrees. We have weirdos like me who come from humanities backgrounds and sort of back into publishing. But we don't have something that does what, say, SSP does, which is bring together a lot of, frankly, strange bedfellows and says, figure it out. And I think that's really important, and it's important not just at the level that we're all at, but it's really important at the level of 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, undergraduates, and graduate students. So I also want to talk a little bit about what that curriculum would look like. And I think I'll return to Joyce here as a way of closing out. The publishing hackathon idea is really exciting to me. And I understand some of the anxieties that people expressed on Tuesday about, yeah, but if you crowdsource everything, you tend to demote the value of those tasks, right? If designers are always submitting to contests, suddenly they don't have contracts. And I think that's a valid concern. But I also think that as a training mechanism, the hackathon model, I mean, imagine a hackathon that doesn't stop on Sunday, right? Imagine a hackathon that stops at the end of the semester. I think there's something really evocative about this idea, because what it does is it trains community, it trains collaboration, it trains problem solving, project management. There's a hands-on kind of capacity here. And I don't want to just stop by talking about talk. I think it's easy to train people to talk well together, maybe. But we also do need to think pragmatically about certain skills now that we live in this disintermediated ecosystem. And I know that Alice and Maria are going to be talking to some of this, but ways to build that infrastructure on a more pragmatic level, obviously metadata, right? Building out infrastructures for discoverability, building out better search mechanisms. Google is the king of Google. And I think if we can recognize that Google has created an empire that they rule, but they haven't created an empire that works for everyone. I mean, it works for a lot of people, I know. But they haven't created an empire that works for the kinds of discoverability that publishers are good at. And I think there's an intervention there that we can tap into. And it's through good metadata and good and new and creative search mechanisms for books, for content. So I'll stop there. I think this is a really important conversation to have, and I love the idea of having it under the aegis of alignment, not just falling into some kind of lockstep, right, but thinking about how publishers, commercial publishers, university presses, librarians, students, et cetera, actually can align. The kinds of antagonism that have been built up across these divisions are poisonous to what we're up to, because what we're up to is exactly the same thing, and that's getting good information out to good people, and I believe powerfully in that notion. So I'll stop there. Thanks very much, and Alice is up next.